Hello crafty friends, it's Alicia here with a project for Tailored Expressions. In today's video, I'm going to be stamping 1/2 sheet of cardstock and turning it into 4 finished cards using the new Happy Half Sheets Volume 1. Here is a look at the cutting guide and layout card that I'll be using, and just so you're aware, yours will look slightly different. They will be printed back to back and laminated for extra durability. I will be creating my own pattern cardstock and stamping my sentiments and focal points with the new Bits and Blooms stamp set with coordinating dies. Today's color palette is Mulled Wine, Candy Corn, Spearmint, Blueberry, and Oreo. Also, because I'll be doing some free range stamping, I got out some stamp blocks to fit the stamps. I'll be stamping onto Sugar Cube and using blueberry cardstock for my card bases. And to hold everything together, I'll be using a variety of adhesives. Let's get crafty! I cut the piece of Sugar Cube cardstock in half. One piece will be used for stamping my pattern cardstock, and on the other one I'll be stamping my sentiment and focal points. To get started, I brought in the Bits and Blooms stamp set and all of the inks. What I like to do when I make a pattern cardstock like this is go ahead and select which stamp or stamps I want for each color and just put those right onto the lids. That way later when I go to grab an ink for the next round of stamping, the stamps I want are right there. I'm going to start the stamping with the largest stamp that I'll be using. It's easier later to fill in with the smaller pieces versus starting smaller and then trying to fit in a large image. So for this, I'm using Candy Corn ink with the largest flower from the set. I like to usually start in a corner and make sure that image bleeds or falls off of that piece of cardstock. Then I try to do triangles with my images. So you'll see here I've made that first triangle with 3 flowers. And then when I continue to fill in the piece of cardstock, I just keep making triangles. So for the 4th one, I put it in between the 2nd and 3rd one, trying to leave about the same amount of white space between them. I continue stamping until the half sheet of cardstock is filled with the candy corn flowers, and you'll notice that mine is on top of a grid paper placemat. This is super handy when you're doing free range stamping like this. The extra grid paper just catches all of that ink. Also, when I'm done with the stamping, I can just do stamps off on the edge to clean off the stamps a little bit. Now, I did go ahead and put this right back on that lid to keep it handy in case I'll need it later. And spoiler alert, I did. For the next round of stamping, I'll be using blueberry ink with the smaller flower, and this is going to be about the same thing. I'm still going to try to keep them in triangles, but this time I'm going to go in between the orange flowers that I just stamped. Now, because the pattern paper will be rotated later for the cards, make sure that you rotate your images a little bit as you stamp, just so nothing looks completely upside down when you cut it and adhere it to your card base later. I'm curious to know if you've ever stamped your own pattern cardstock. Is it something you've never done, something you've done a handful of times, or something that you do often? Let us know in that comment section below. When I finished with the blue flowers, I saw an area that needed some stamping but didn't really need another blue flower, and that was when I brought back in the original one with the candy corn ink and just stamped a little bit over there on that left edge. Next up are the 2 leaves with the spearmint ink, and I'm going to break my largest to smallest stamp rule here just a little bit. Instead of stamping the larger leaf, I'm actually going to take the smaller one of the 2 and put one next to each of those blue flowers. I just thought this was easier so that I could fit some of those little ones in with the blue flowers before I would cover up the area that I would need with the larger flower and larger leaf. You may also have noticed that I switched stamp block sizes. Now I could have used the larger one that I did for the first 2 flowers, but if you do have stamp blocks that fit your images better, try to use those instead, because sometimes you might feel like rocking the stamp block and maybe get some extra ink where you don't want it. After I thought I had enough leaves stamped, I brought in the mulled wine ink with the 2 heart stamps. Now this is going to be one of those stamps where you'll definitely want to rotate it because again, when you go to cut and put them on the card fronts later, this is going to be an image that could look upside down. I went in first with the larger heart in some of the bigger open areas, and then I brought in the 2 smaller ones that were on the single stamp and filled the areas in a little bit more. And finally, it was time for the Oreo ink and the little splatter stamps. These make great additions and help fill in those final spaces. Now, sometimes you might want to keep stamping with one of the images, but on something like this, less can sometimes be more, and you can always go back in later and fill up any white space you think is on your cardstock. Here's a close-up look at my finished stamped piece. Now if you would like to follow the placement that I did for your first few tries, go ahead and pause the video here to get a good look at it. Now, even though that piece was finished, I wasn't quite done stamping. I did want to stamp some of the blueberry flowers for my focal points and some of those smaller leaves. So on that second half of Sugar Cube cardstock, I stamped 4 of each, and I also then brought back in the stamp set for the sentiments. Now there are 3 in the set, which means I'll need to double one up, and I decided the Hello Friend would be the one I stamped 2 of. This will be stamped in Oreo ink to bring out some of those splatters in my previously stamped piece. And I ended up stamping the Hello Friend 3 times because the first one I think I pushed a little bit too hard with the stamp. Once I had everything stamped for my sentiments and focal points, I brought in the coordinating die set and took the sheet off camera to cut everything. Here's a look at the finished pieces, and just a heads up, there is no coordinating die for that smallest leaf, but it was super simple to fussy cut. Now it's time to cut down that stamped piece using the Happy Half Sheet cutting instructions. Now I will be using a trimmer with measurements, but if measuring is not your thing, the Happy Half Sheet card is actually printed at 100% or full size. So you could bring in a pencil and just make small little tick marks where the cutting lines are on the printed card. Then you could take this sheet to your trimmer and just slice right where those little pencil marks are. And don't worry about having to erase those later, they'll most likely be cut right off. But for me, I am going to go ahead and use my trimmer. I have my Happy Half Sheet right off there to the side, and I follow the measurements as I cut. The Happy Half Sheet that I used today has you start by basically cutting your half sheet in half. So after I did that, I cut each side down, and as I got those pieces done, I would bring that half sheet back in and just make sure all of my pieces look good compared to the printed card. To cut the second half, I started by rotating it, and once again, I just followed the measurements that I had right off camera. The back side of the Happy Half Sheet shows you each of the card layouts. Off camera, I cut and folded 4 blueberry card bases, and I'm going to start by assembling card number 1. I brought in the 2 patterned strips for this card, and I used some tape runner to get these added to the card front. Now I did try to look at the Happy Half Sheet and place the strips where it showed, but you could definitely switch this up. Put them closer, put them farther away, totally up to you. These are just great starting points. While I continue to work on the card fronts, I thought I would tell you a little bit more about Happy Half Sheets Volume Number 1. This laminated card set has 5 separate cards, and if you would stamp the 5 half sheets that it shows, you would yield 22 cards. These are super simple, quick, and easy. They would be a great way to build up your card stash or make sets for friends. And if you didn't notice, on the card that I'm sharing and on each of the other ones, there is a suggested color combination, so maybe you can step outside the box and try one you might not have thought of before. Let us know in the comment section below what excites you most about these Happy Half Sheets. Once all the pattern pieces were adhered, it was time to decorate the card fronts. The Happy Half Sheets do give suggestions where you can add embellishing, and for mine, I decided to add a sentiment and the little flower cluster. So what I did was add a drop of glue to the bottom of each leaf and just adhere that right to the back of the flowers. Now most of this I did off screen, and I also added some foam tape to each of the flowers and the sentiments just to add a little dimension to the card. As I continued assembling the cards by adding the sentiment and the flower, I kept the Happy Half Sheet right there next to me to use that as a jumping off point for placement. And once I liked where they sat, I removed the release paper from the back of the foam tape strips and got the pieces put in place. Now if you wanted a little wiggle time, you could also put some liquid glue on top of your foam tape so you could move and adjust the pieces even more. I finished adding the rest of these pieces off camera, and before I called my cards finished, I wanted to add a little sparkle. So I brought in the Bits and Pieces orange glitter drops, and I'm going to add some to the front of each card. I thought this color was a good complement to the blueberry card base, and it helped accentuate the orange flowers we stamped earlier. I did pre-place some on the card fronts, and then using Embelly Jelly and Barely Art glue, I got those put in place. Another thing I did to finish the cards was add a piece of white cardstock to the inside so my personal message would be easy to read, and I also added another one of those candy corn flowers. And here are some close-up looks at the finished cards. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch today's video. If you enjoyed the process, a thumbs up is appreciated. And if you're not already a subscriber, we do hope you'll click on the button below so you're the first to know about our latest videos. To find out more about the products I used today, you can check out the links in the description box below or visit the Tailored Expressions online store at tailoredexpressions.com.